Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode. Let me get my camera fixed here. Thank you all for being here. It's my great joy and pleasure to be with you today as we explore another No Small Talk Sunday, except when we're discussing the quantum field and quantum foam and all the super small of the small of the small. um, okay, so um, today we're talking about the grand mystery of art. And this is such a unbelievably gigantic subject that, you know, I'm not going to be focusing on um, the great works of art specifically, but the process of art. The thing about why human beings have been making art since the beginning of time. What is the drive, the impetus to be artistic? And I know a bit about what I'm talking about because I'm an artist. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. And when I graduated from high school in 1966, at the absolute core center of the great movement of the 60s, um, art went through significant changes at that point in another epoch. Um, and those were the years of, the turmoil of Richard Nixon and the Vietnam War and the draft. And, if you weren't going to college, you were going to a rice paddy to kill people. So but also in the 60s was, the make love, not war, heal the planet, holistic foods, holistic health. All of these great movements started there. A great revolution in consciousness and the rising of expanding consciousness with um, these sacred alkaloid medications that the ancients had been using and the shamans had been using in every culture. Mescaline and psilocybin, mushrooms, and the advent of the discovery of LSD, and the use of that actually therapeutically by a group of psychiatrists in northwestern Massachusetts at the University of Amherst. That was Richard Alpert, who became Baba Ram Dass, and Timothy Leary and Gunther Weil. I met Richard Alpert as Baba Ram Dass a few times. In later years, when I was at the California Institute for Human Science, and I was on the faculty there, Timothy Leary aligned himself with that school, with that college, and I actually met him and began working with him. I produced the soundtracks for his public demonstrations of psychedelic demonstrations. In the years as a young man, when I was part of the Gurdjieff Mystery School, one of the people in that school with me was Gunther Weil, so one of the psychiatrists using psychedelics with the other two. So for me, I sort of went through a transition as a young man who loved to make music and loved to do anything artistic. I was a filmmaker. I was making experimental films with exploring animations, and I was composing music and playing music and making art and drawing and doodling and painting and doing all this kind of stuff. And so it was natural for me in the 60s, when I was trying to figure out what college to go to, art school was where I wanted to go. And I sort of brushed aside the concerns of how are you going to make a living as an artist, because I was swept up in the movement of the 60s. But as I began to transform myself from just a person who liked to draw and stuff into an artist, formally getting trained in, in one department, I'm building my own canvases because you can't buy them that big, 6 feet by 10 feet canvas that you put the wood together and you reinforce it and you stretch the canvas yourself with a special tool, and then you prep the canvas with gesso, and unless you're doing a watercolor. And I learned how to mix my own paints, and it was an amazing process. And so I'm making these big 10-foot paintings in one area, and then in another class I'm doing lithography, which is done on a big flattened out stone with an acid resist. And in another room, and so those are like painting, lithographs about this big through a big printing press. And then another room, I'm making precious little square metal etchings where I'm etching right on the metal and then rubbing it with ink and putting it through a printing press. And then doing sculpture and metal casting and mold making, and I became an expert in making my own alloys and all this kind of stuff. It was an amazing period of transformation for me to grapple with the question. Artists in art school have the burning question of the day hovering around everything, which is, what is art? What do you perceive to be art? And in the 60s, that question came up to front and center with artists who were pushing the boundaries of what was considered to be art. And in reality, what began to come to me was an artist is the eyes and the ears of humanity. That is, artists who spend the time and the training to take a good look at what you're looking at and a good listen to what you're hearing. And then there's dance and movement and, all of the arts, all of them are creative exercises using certain pathways in neurology in the brain that taps into a source of original, new ideas. And some of the most famous artists in the world are the ones who had a direct opening to a source of creativity from God knows where. A musician calls it their muse from another dimension. Who knows where the music comes from or where the art comes from? It's some deep connection that you allow to open. And in reality, it's play. You're an adult, but you allow the childlike innocence of someone who has never seen anything before and tries to draw it. And when you do it correctly, you reveal something about the uniqueness of you. The drawings that you make will never be drawn by anybody else, because this is a unique expression of something deep and essential and personal that you are allowing to come out to create something that when another person looks at it, they get a message about the essential nature of you and how you see the world. And that is the thing that seems to be very powerful, that the people who seem to be most successful have allowed themselves to broadcast to the world, this is me, here I am, this is how I experience this reality, and this is a unique view that no one else has. everyone is seeing the world from a different standpoint, and essentially from the standpoint of the ancient texts in Sanskrit. Um, you know, we are the eyes and the ears and the bodies of the central godhood who is viewing reality through us, experiencing reality through us. We are the eyes and the ears and the bodies of God. Um, and so when we allow that pure expression to come through to show the rest of the world what our viewpoint looks like, then that is of great interest to other people. And the more pure we can allow that to come forth, it tends to be, those people tend to be the ones who are become historical and famous. The search for the connection, the search for keeping our view and our experience of our own reality, the reality that we experience, to connect with that deeply and to share it. So what it means to be an artist is everyone is an artist. We all start out as artists. As children, we are artists. We are scientifically exploring through great curiosity and interest everything that we can explore in the natural environment. We're looking at leaves, and we're looking at bugs, and we're asking, why is the sky blue? I mean, these are deep questions, the kind of questions that scientists have been asking since the beginning of time. But when we trace back the deeper expression of art, right back to the beginning, this becomes one of the most profound historical lessons of humanity. And so, of course, you're in trouble when I putting my artist hat on. There you go, my artist hat. Yeah, so this one is from Australia. But so once we surrender to the part of us that is the childlike wonder of the world, we are already an artist. And you don't have to paint a picture that looks totally real or photographically real, in the struggle of what is art. Turns out that that's not necessary at all. Whatever comes out of you and whatever it looks like when it's pure is amazing. So, here we go on our little journey of art. And, this concept and idea that art is a fundamental expression of human consciousness, consciousness experiencing reality, and trying to communicate what you experience through what we call art. It transcends something deep. Not only of what we're experiencing through our senses, but how that's filtering through the inner dimensions of our soul, our psyche. And historically, it's the sort of communal identity of whole civilizations, where something in consciousness and something in the brain. Of course, now we have all kinds of different EEG studies of exactly what's going on in the brain when you're making art, when you're appreciating art, or when you're making music, or any of these activities will light up all kinds of areas in the brain. We already know that somebody making music is one of the best things you can do with the brain, because it forces the right left hands to be doing different activities at the same time, and forces communication of the hemispheres and lighting up all kinds of different pathways and emotional processing centers. It's a very clearing and balancing and synchronizing activity that is very useful. When I was a kid, before computers and before cell phones and all that kind of stuff, in the morning my mom would sort of shoo me out of the house, and and tell me to go out and play. So I'd be outside all day long in the fields of grass and the trees and little caves I might find and all kinds of other stuff. And I was just creating an imaginary, fun something. And because of that, I was using my imagination a lot. And if I was playing cowboys and Indians, I had a little gun and a hat on, but I was in a movie. I was in a cowboy and Indian movie, fully fleshed out. Um, I didn't see the backyard anymore. Um, so running out in the fields and being in nature was super powerful mechanism for burning powerful pathways in my mind for original exploration and creativity that served me the rest of my life. It helped me to uh, look at things from a different angle, out of the box, than most of humanity. And that's a sign of a true researcher who is coming up with new things, things that could be patented in this particular world. So, all the way back to before anything we know of is these sort of amazing cave paintings. Human beings have been making art absolutely since the beginning. Uh, I mean, some of the cave paintings found in France, Chauvet, Lassault, these are 30,000-year-old cave paintings with a very sophisticated depiction of animals. So these were really good artists. I mean, remember, these are like the first artists to paint something on a surface. But all of these were deeply linked to sort of hunting rituals and shamanic practices. They were not decorative. They were deeply functional, part of a mystical relationship with nature, survival, and community. These, and we see now in modern psychotherapy, particularly through Jung, that these cave paintings, specifically of the animals that were being hunted, or that were like horses and stuff that formed a special bond with human beings to ride a horse to help you hunt. All of these things were depicted. That the animals that were depicted was part of a shamanic practice of sort of visualization work and the understanding that if I can draw pictures of my prey, then I magnetize those. And during that process of painting, I am concentrating on manifesting a good hunt and finding plenty of things to hunt. So it's going to be a good hunt day, that I'm going to go out and immediately find these particular animals, that they're going to be there for me because I am manifesting them. I'm making them real. I'm painting them from my imagination, and in that process, I'm physicalizing it. Very deep stuff here. The kind of animals that perhaps I need to search for a horse. I need to find a horse that I can tame. Or I'm magnetizing myself in the mind of my horse, and I'm depicting the prey that we're going to be hunting. And when you see these kind of paintings on these painting walls, where they put their hand up against the wall and they sprayed the paint by putting it in their mouth and, creating a spray from their mouth on their hands. So here we have a community of artists, of shamans, and this is communicating, this is me, I'm here. For future generations, 30,000 years later, to say, look, this was a person here. This here was a person. They went through the activity of picking berries and squashing them down and turning them into liquid, putting it in their mouth and spraying it against their hand. I'm here. This is me. And then there were ceremonies around these paintings, a visualization, manifestation ceremony for a good hunt. By spending the time and energy to draw the most realistic pictures of the animals that you want to be there when you go out with your spear to hunt something, you're manifesting them to be there and to be an easy hunt. This is powerful stuff that even today we do, this whole manifestation and visualization process. And then there was the art of body painting, that different tribes had different sort of artwork that they invented to paint themselves with. Every culture has some kind of a body artwork thing, but all of it had great meaning. These were sacred symbols, and they were put in a very specific way, and it was not decorative. It was power enhancing. It was painting yourself with sacred symbols to make you invulnerable, to make you fearsome in the eyes of something that you might be hunting or enemies. The whole cultural dynasties of places like these great civilizations in the past, like India, I mean, like Egypt. Look at, you have to remember what this looked like during their time, where these things were pristine and painted, and the pyramids had gold tops, and they were, white sandstone polished. So when the sun hit them, they created huge, spectacular reflection patterns on the ground. It's amazing, the high art of the past. And the art itself, the depictions. Back in Egyptian times, of course, there wasn't the concept yet of creating a three-dimensional representation of people and things. So that's where you see the feet are on a horizontal plane. There's no depth there. There's sort of one in front of the other, because there wasn't a concept of three dimensions yet. These people were on a two-dimensional plane. Like here, you could see that they're sort of trapped in a two-dimensional thing. They either look left or right, and their hands and their bodies are in such a way as they're flat. As time went on, art evolved, and three-dimensional representation started to evolve. But the high art in every conceivable way of ancient civilizations was worked into every aspect of life. You didn't just build a big blank doorway with columns. That doorway was of magnificent size, and those columns were encrusted with details of art. And there was huge, gigantic statues that were painted, that the pyramids were these amazing structures. Never mind the fact that the mystery of the pyramids, and as energy accumulators and all the rest of that. That's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the high art in architecture and in sculpture and in painting as an integral part of the community of civilization itself. It would be inconceivable to have a world that was not infused and synchronized up with deep art. And all of the art of those times was a sacred activity. It was there to remind you of the grandeur of the gods, of the grandeur of the civilization, of the grandeur of what the civilization is there doing in these sort of deep esoteric ways. very high, sort of mind-blowing stuff going on those times. And the sort of art, this idea of bas relief, where you have to carve away the bulk of the rock in order to make these parts stand up, be extended from the surface, requires you to use a hammer and chisel and chisel away most of the surface so it's in the background. Very difficult stuff to do. When we get into other cultures, they also were grandiose in their scope and in their infusion of art. These sort of Mesopotamia. I mean, we've covered these sort of things before. Back in Egypt, these things were all related to mathematical principles that were infused in architecture to point out, to align with cosmic ratios and the value of pi and the circumference of the earth and the location of all the masses of all the continents, so that the pyramids were built on the balance point of all the continent masses on the planet. I mean, it just goes on and on, that the position of these pyramids, reflected the three important stars in Orion, the Orion Nebula. It's like amazing stuff. Stuff that has stood the test of time over thousands of years to communicate to future generations. We knew what was going on. These ziggurats, unbelievable what was going on in these things. The sacred architecture and many of the architectural rooms, both in Egypt and in these other civilizations like Mesopotamia, had a deep understanding of acoustic resonance in certain shaped chambers that were based on divine harmonics to accentuate harmonic fifths, which is close to the golden section ratio and stuff like that. I mean, amazing. That art and architecture and painting were all infused and synchronized up together as an expression of deep spirituality and values and the exploration of the nature of reality. We get into the high art in India. Again, we've got bas reliefs where all of this had to be carved away for this to be standing out. Amazing work. Amazing art. Gods and goddesses. This is made of brass. That means it was casted. That means a sophisticated knowledge of mold making and smelting of alloys. Brass is an alloy. Bronze is an alloy. Different metals mixed together in certain ratio and proportions to produce a certain color and a certain sound for a bell. Very sophisticated. These architectural spaces that were tuned to divine harmonics that would accentuate sound wave reverberations. But it wasn't good enough just to make the space. It had to be encrusted with details, art, carvings that were depicting the central idea of spirituality that these were all expressing. Look at this place, carved out of a mountain, hammered and chiseled back into a mountain to create a temple. These pillars were carved out of the mountain itself. Crazy, amazing. And look at these sculptures that had to be, like the surface of this had to be hammered and chiseled away for this to be standing out so high. Amazing. These weren't made separately and glued on or something. This is carved out of a big piece of stone so that all of this part of the stone was chipped away. Amazing. You know, Buddhist art, and as we'll see in a second, Hindu art, and this whole concept of the different teachings of Buddha and all of the sort of powers and that were called sort of demigods, the powers depicted. Here's another one. This is, this is a metal piece. This particular one is hammered from the behind. It's a sheet of, looks like bronze, a sheet of bronze that is hammered with a hammer from behind in order to make these things raised. Amazing, amazing, difficult to do. Stone statues that are encrusting these sacred temples. Mind-blowing, really. These bas-relief carvings. It's just, anybody to try to do something like this, you realize how unimaginably difficult this is. And the amount of attention to detail and the dedication of this art to deeply held spiritual values that would stand the test of time, thousands of years. These amazing temples, Hindu art, all in the service of spirituality. Amazing stuff. These amazing carvings. Just goes on and on. It becomes, your brain just sort of blows open if you know anything about how difficult it is to do any of these things. All in the service of spirit. China, with its deep grasp of sacred proportions and golden section ratios, that the fact that we have a focus of activity here in this zone and this is mostly empty, this is a golden section ratio here. But once again, devoted to depictions of spirituality, the great forces of nature, this is Confucius, yeah, the grand civilization of Greece. I mean, we've talked about this many times before, but as humanity evolved, and the sense of art evolved with it, then art began to really focus on sacred mathematics and geometry in building spaces and in artwork, that now all art is devoted to expressing sacred mathematical principles, golden section ratios in particular. Look at the difference here. All that's left is some ruins of these great civilizations that in their time were really something to witness. How art was deeply imbued in everything that was in society. As a matter of course. And the paintings followed that. Sculpture followed that. Look at the amazing detail in these marble sculptures. So now civilization is beginning to focus in on super realistic renditions of idealized human beings in the forms of gods. So the gods would be the perfect forms, the perfect shapes of the body, conforming to the golden section ratio and other, sacred mathematical principles carved out of marble in order to represent, so you could see what it would look like, a perfectly proportioned human being, that sort of thing. The perfect body and the deep study of muscles and tendons, and amazing. the great paintings of the time. This is Aristotle. Paintings of the highest thinkers of the time, not just a painting of people, but a painting of one of the central figures of the time. The school of Aristotle and Socrates, the conversations of Socrates in the school of Socrates, where it was a laissez-faire, where people were in deep philosophical discussions of the growing tip of new ideas of the day. And we get to the great artists like Michelangelo and these incredible paintings on the ceilings of these giant cathedrals commissioned by the church. Amazing. So once again, it's all spirituality. It's depictions of God and the perfectly proportioned person, Adam, in the first act of creation, where God touches and makes physical form out of something, out of an idea. And Michelangelo went on to carve a statue out of marble. This is David, who's 20 feet tall, as a study in 3D of the perfectly proportioned human body, according to the golden section ratio. So this is a study of sacred proportions of the human body, so that they took it on himself as a task to carve a statue that is perfect, a perfect body, just so you could walk around it and see what a perfect body looks like, the perfectly proportioned, idealized body, what it looks like. People had it in their minds, but nobody had done it. He did it. And Da Vinci was about the same business. That's what this Vitruvian man thing is all about, that these proportions had to do with the sacred value of pi, the circle. You see, in the circle, he fits perfectly in this circle. And then the squaring of the circle, which is a big mathematical conundrum, proves that when his feet are together, he's on the square. When his hands are stretched straight out, he's in the square. When his hands are at a diagonal, he's in the circle. And when his feet are at the diagonal, he's in the circle. So the human body is the study of the squaring of the circle. And all of the proportions of the human body and the concept of beauty were related to 1.618 proportions, the golden section ratio. That's what these lines are here. That the lines of demarcation of this distance to this distance, golden section ratio, this distance to that distance, golden section ratio, that distance to this distance, golden section ratio. Same thing with the face, same thing with everything in the body. All the proportions are related. This was Da Vinci interrogating the secrets of the universe as the mathematical ratios deposited in the shape of his own body. There was the Christian illumination of the sacred manuscripts. I mean, with these amazing paintings and with a quill pen and ink, huge, thick volumes, libraries of these volumes, illuminated texts of sacred works. These guys would spend their whole life, all day long, in a meditative study through art. Art as meditation. And then we get into the more modern era, where the concept of the rigid forms of art devoted to spirituality and communicating something about the spirituality that the whole civilization is there to express, that all of a sudden was broken open. And at that point, the artists began to, the whole Impressionist movement, where your impression of what you experience of reality as an individual, which is what I was sort of talking about before, where the folks now started to come on my personal experience of what reality looks like, which is different than anybody else's. That my experience of what I am seeing it. Now I'm going to communicate that to you because I have a unique view of what's going on. And so these paintings became an expression of an emotional tone of what I'm experiencing, my impression of what reality looks like. So it didn't need to be factually perfect drawings. The idea that the overall impression of this particular scene is what was trying to be communicated. Monet, I mean, the impression. You can see that there's a bridge over a lily pond, but each lily is not, I mean, each blade of grass and the bridge itself is not the attention of detail to make it absolutely 100% real like a photograph. It's the emotion behind what is being experienced that was attempted to be communicated. The Impressionist movement spun from that. And then we have the ultimate impressionist of all time is Van Gogh. That this, you look at this and yes, you can see trees and grass and mountains and clouds, but that is completely not what most people see. This is what he was experiencing, and he communicated it well. But he was driven, like many artists, driven to paint, driven to capture what he was experiencing. Being an artist is not just, painting happy pictures. You get deeply involved and committed, that you spend all your time wrestling with a certain avenue of art that you're exploring. And you spend hours and days and weeks on a single work that you are grappling with. How do I keep this door open for a pure flow? And the more I do that, the more I exercise that door to be open. And that changes everything about who you are. And the deeper you can open that connection, the more powerful it is when people see it, and the more famous you become. Yes, there's a face there, somebody with a beard and a hat, with a night sky, but this is like, this person is like tripping on acid or something, right? This is a unique view of reality that we get to pull the curtain back and have a look at how somebody else is experiencing the same reality that we experience. The radiance and the movement of the stars and the swirling nature of the suns and the moons and how the wind is blowing the trees. I mean, it's flipping amazing. I mean, like these kind of works of art. But this one, with these, somehow the reflections in the water of these stars up here is something about, and the flow and movement of this whole thing. This is sort of amazing. And then all of a sudden we went into another realm where a new level of artists start to push the boundaries even further of what is art, what, these kind of things. So, like I said, here we have these sort of pictures where eyes are on the same side of the head and the nose is coming out the side of the face, and this kind of weird stuff here. I've sort of told these stories in the past, so please bear with me if I have to say them again. But my first day in art school, in the drawing class, when the teacher comes in and says, take out a piece of paper and a pencil, your drawing pencil. Drawing pencil is not this, it's a special pencil. But, and I'm ready to start drawing. And he's going, okay, we're going to draw a self-portrait. And I'm going, oh, but there's no mirror, you know. So I'm thinking that's going to be an interesting study of me remembering what my face looks like so I can draw it from memory. I should know what my face looks like. I've seen it a million times in the mirror. So if I close my eyes and think about what I would look like and then try to draw that, you know, and then he said, no, 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 you're holding the pencil all wrong. It needs to be held like this. Now it's like, oh, okay, I've never done it this way before, but, you know, it says, yeah, and uh, with the other hand. So now it's like, I've never drawn with my left hand before, particularly holding the pencil like this. And it says self-portrait with no mirror. It's like, this is getting really gnarly. And it goes with eyes closed. So all of a sudden, now my whole consciousness is trying to sort of scope out with my eyes closed where the pencil lead hit the paper, and every line I draw to make an eye or the hair, I'm sort of holding an image of that on the paper, and I'm trying to follow it. And when I open my eyes after I've drawn this self-portrait, it looks like this, right? The eyes are on the same side of the head. One of the eyes might be drifting out of the side of the head, and the ears are in funny places, and the hair is not in the right place. It's like all of a sudden I realized that I had just become Picasso. That what Picasso was trying to communicate here is a view of reality that is so far out of the box that everything we do is according to a set of rules that have been added to us as we grew up. That you're supposed to draw within the lines. You're supposed to color within the lines. You're supposed to make people look a certain way with eyes where you would expect them to be. And his question was, why? Well, why can't both eyes be over here? This is art. I mean, you're just making something up. I mean, you don't have to follow any kind of rules from anybody loaded onto you. Let's make up new rules. Let's do something completely different. That's like, look at this thing. It's like, yeah, that right there is like, what is that, a person? Or is that a tongue? Or you're so far out of the box, you're in a completely different realm. And the shock of seeing these kind of paintings shocked you out of your box. That was his purpose. And I mean, Salvador Dali, his, ultra surrealist school that began, where reality itself is completely malleable, that everything you look at now is up for grabs, that these are deep images from the subconscious mind, things that he finds in deep states of revelry in another realm, the language of the unconscious, where you go when you dream, where all bets are off. And then we go into another realm further out of the box with guys like Rothko, who are just painting huge, giant canvases, 10 foot, like what I was doing in school, 10 foot wide and 6 feet tall or 8 feet tall, with huge swaths of color that it doesn't look like much here, but when you stand in a museum in front of one of these paintings, it's immense. And you're sort of surrounded by the power of these huge swaths of color. And something, he was exploring these relationships that, depending on what color is next to the next one, there's this thing that happens. There's an emotion that it's now pure into big, giant geometric relationships of colors, which are a language of the emotions. These are selling for, tens of millions of dollars, these paintings. Kandinsky, selling for tens of millions of dollars. Jackson Pollock, one of the most famous, his are hundreds of millions of dollars. This most famous painting right here. The more you look at it, the more you see. It's an exploration of being as far out of the box as you can possibly be, where you now are free of all learnings, of all constraints, to just let whatever is in trying to come out, let it come. I'm not concerned about what it looks like. I'm not concerned about what people think of it. That as it flows out, I learn from it. And what I'm learning is something about my own deep conscious mind. Jung got into the act. I mean, he was a deep study of ancient literature and ancient art and the allegories and the metaphors of the unconscious mind presented as artworks. He was deeply on the trail of all the ancient civilizations and the sacred art that they were part of. As a matter of fact, he wrote books and drew pictures. This is a Carl Jung picture. He was a painter. He was an artist. He got into doing it himself because he understood the deepness of connecting with that creative part in yourself that is outside the box and opening your own doorway to allowing that part of you to come out. That there's something of great value doing that. And you don't have to go to school to get it because we're all there. We all have that in us. Carl Jung. It is an astounding fact indeed that the collective unconscious seems to be in contact with nearly everything. The language of the unconscious mind, the collective unconscious mind, bleeding through each of us if we allow the door to open. These pictures that he was drawing. The collective unconscious contains the whole spiritual heritage of mankind's evolution, born anew in the brain structure of every individual. These are the reasons why he's my favorite. And in the course of studying the material to put all this together for this broadcast, I came across the fact that Jung had collected all of his drawings, that he had created a book, the Red Book, the famous Red Book that nobody seems to know about. I'd never heard about it before. This Red Book of Carl Jung as artist, but artist devoted to an exploration of the deep collective unconscious mind. And when I found out about this book, it was like, what? Carl Jung has the Red Book of his drawings? I have to see this. So I started looking it up, and I'm realizing, can I buy this book? So I do Amazon search, and there it is. There is the book. I have to buy the book. And then I realized, holy shit, this book is like $250. But I'm only here once, I'm going to buy it. Check it out. Now that's a book. Look at this thing. The Red Book by Carl Jung. Oh my God. And it's filled with this kind of stuff. Look at that. Unbelievable. Picture after picture after picture. And illuminated. Wait a second. These pages are illuminated. He did all that. It's handwritten. It's not in English. It's handwritten and illuminated. There's pages and pages of illuminated text and sacred drawings, and just sort of warps the mind. Carl Jung is esoteric artist, right? With dozens and dozens and dozens of these paintings and pages of illuminated text, handwritten. in a book that's this thick. It's like, I'm going, there was a depth of Carl Jung that I had no idea was going on. I mean, that aside from being a psychiatrist into all this amazing stuff, the esoteric stuff and the secrets of civilization and humanity and the unconscious mind and the collective unconscious mind and all the rest of that, was his deep study about the power of art to connect to the soul, and how that has run through a thread through every civilization on the planet. And there's something deeply important about that, because the imagery that you call forth when you open the door, the inner door, is the collective unconscious mind. Those images are sacred, repeatable, common. The allegories and the metaphors, the language of the unconscious is similar across the board under the hood for all of us. So when you get deep down into that and you express it as art, other people respond to that from an unconscious level and have an experience of opening the door for them. I mean, Einstein was famous for being able to play the violin. He played the violin to put his mind at rest and center himself again. That the deep understanding of the physics and the mathematics of harmonics and overtones and octaves, the mathematics of how the universe is made, music theory. But it's food for the soul. He was good enough that he could have made a living as a first violinist in an orchestra. He could have done that as a living. If I were not a physicist, I would probably be a musician. I often think in music. I live my daydreams in music. I see my life in terms of music. I cannot tell if I would have done any creative work of importance in music, but I do know that I get most joy in life out of my violin. Sorry, this seems to be cut off here. Huh. And then we're into the present day, where we're so solidly out of the box, where we have the ability of artificial intelligence to now make art, you know, and I'm sort of no exception to that. I've been sort of doing the same thing. That first of all, using something called Mid-Journey to make art, and it was a fascinating exploration. I would write a sentence of describing what I wanted the computer to try to make a drawing of, and it would make these spectacular drawings that would sort of blow your mind. And I've used that more and more for these live streams. You might recognize some of these images. This was Plato and his muse. I described it, what I wanted it to do, and it came up with this picture. Beautiful, amazing. This is a picture I used in one of my broadcasts. Writing an idea, communicating to a computer, and a computer in about 20 seconds. Creating a drawing, a picture that would take months and months and months for a human being to do. It now gives me a tool to get an idea out in a physical form, to communicate something to somebody else of what I'm trying to envision in my mind, without me having to spend a month trying to make that painting. We now have new tools. I can consult, an artificial intelligence companion. Flesh out this idea for me, and kabang, there it is. Is something of value there, particularly for putting a broadcast like this together. All of these are artificial intelligence paintings from a prompt that I have used. in these broadcasts. This particularly is an amazing picture here. This is a really beautiful one. This right here, artificial intelligence picture. This one that I use every broadcast. Group mind link from a prompt. Can you make a picture of a group of people in the process of linking their minds together into a whole? A group mind link that links them as a common entity. This is what it came up with a whole bunch of other ones. I chose this one out of all of the ones that we did. Which brings up this whole new science of neuroaesthetics. Fascinating sort of concept, the study of the neurology of art, the neurology of aesthetics, appreciation of beauty, of what goes on in an artist's mind, what goes on in someone's mind who sees a work of art that somebody else created, and what it does to you in the brain. A quick thought of neuroaesthetics as a design strategy to break flat-lined society. In other words, let's get society out of the box. Why our brains crave beauty, art, and nature. Neuroaesthetics suggests that engagement with such phenomena is essential rather than nice to have. Something about art that is an essential component of a healthy person, psychologically, brain science, health-wise, whether you consider yourself to be an artist or not, you begin to exercise this ability and something happens. Something opens up. You become having a different relationship with the world around you. You open up doorways of neural pathways of brain, hand, eye coordination that is important. You open a conduit with the deep unconscious mind and allow what's down there to come out in a picture that communicates something to you that you didn't know about yourself before, or about the cosmos. Real art in museums stimulates the brain much more than reprints. How crazy is that? Scientists in the Netherlands using eye tracking and MRI scans found enormous difference between genuine works and posters. That's very interesting. There's something alive that a human being who created this painting and spent their life energy pouring into doing this deposits some of that life energy here in that painting long after they're dead. The life that they spent time of their life laboring over this painting, it deposits an element of that life here that is, in this study, proved that just a photograph, even a high-res photograph of that framed the same way, doesn't do the same thing. A life is missing that was poured into this painting. That's sort of a mind-boggling concept. This book came out recently, Your Brain on Art, How the Arts Transform Us, by these two people, Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross. And Ivy Ross is an old friend of mine. I know her. I'm in this book, and not much, little mention of me in this book. Ivy Ross, Vice President Design at Google. When I first met her, she was head of the Barbie division at Mattel, and it was through her that I got hired by Mattel to boost creativity and out-of-the-box thinking with their creative toy designers. And eventually that became one of my first group mind links with my HRV system in biotuning to find the group frequency and then balance it at its core, calculate octaves of that frequency into theta, and do theta brainwave entrainment with that frequency for the group. And that means that we dropped the barrier of stress among the group and expanded their creativity. And Mattel won Innovative Toy Design of the Year, highest award you can get, plus a dozen other rewards. And that landed me in the Wall Street Journal with an article about the crazy guy doing the brain stuff. And we have been friends ever since. And she's moved through a whole bunch of different companies after she left them. She was part of Disney, and she was part of the Gap and Abercrombie and Fitch and a bunch of other companies before she landed vice president of design at Google. And this person, she's no slouch. She's executive director of International Arts and Mind Lab, Peterson Brain Science Institute at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, where they are exploring how art can heal. How art can heal the body, how art can heal the mind and the heart, psychological issues. This is deep stuff. Distinct neural bases of visual art and music-induced aesthetic experiences. There are deep studies going on in peer-reviewed PubMed articles. Journal of Anatomy, Art, and Brain, Insights from Neuropsychology, Biology, and Evolution, How the Arts Heal, a review of the neuromechanisms behind the therapeutic effects of creative arts on mental and physical health. I suggest everybody who's watching this broadcast go buy some art supplies and start doing it. Take an art class. Just do it. See what it's like. It's an interesting new pathway in your life. You only live once. Why not do this too? See what comes out of it. NPR. Feeling artsy? Here's how making art helps your brain. A lot of my free time is spent doodling. I'm a journalist at NPR's Science Desk by day, but all the time in between, I'm an artist, specifically a cartoonist. I draw in between tasks, I sketch at the coffee shop before work, and I like challenging myself to complete a zine, a little magazine on my 20-minute bus commute. I do these things partly because it's fun and entertaining, but I suspect there's something deeper going on, because when I create, I feel like it clears my head. It helps me make sense of my emotions, and it makes me feel calmer and more relaxed, centered. Here's an AI picture. And the prompt had to do with the collective awakening of the light workers on planet Earth in these dark times where the world is in turmoil and leaning towards authoritarianism and fascism, that the world is in a deeper, weird place. And what you see as a counterbalance is the arising of the light workers. More and more interest in esoteric and love and holistic and saving the planet and all the rest of it. It's rising. And this AI-assisted picture that I use every week is us here in a creative exercise together to open the doorway to that deep collective unconscious part that we all share. And we're using art and music to do it. This is art. And the music soundtrack that we listen to every week with the brain entrainment and all the rest of it, music is the language of emotions. Therefore, the music track that we listen to and this discussion with all the art pieces that you see in the PowerPoint that I create is bringing information in the left hemisphere and art in the right hemisphere and opening a doorway into the collective unconscious mind. And then we use music and brain entrainment. Music, the language of emotions, and the science of entraining brainwaves to specific states to push this envelope into the 21st century. Why? Because there's a possibility there of changing reality itself from the power of numbers. The 100th monkey idea. We get enough of us entrained our brainwaves to exactly the same state with the same idea about what kind of world we want. That world can be manifested by us. That's the purpose behind all of this. So, that being said, here's your headphones. And close your eyes, and here we go. Welcome back. Thank you, everyone, for sort of being on this journey with me and everybody else who's here. Nobody is here following all of this who is not special. It takes a special person to be interested in the secrets and to pursue it and be part of this sort of interesting scientific experiment that we're doing together. So thank you again for being here with me and following sort of a crazy old man doing his thing. You know that you're in trouble when I put one of my hats on. I'm going to leave the chat open for another 10 minutes, and then we can all move to Discord if you have continue chat comments or questions. So thank you all again. Blessings and peace and love and health to everybody, and I'll see you next time.